Let's get more on this. I'm joined by a senior fellow for Russia on the American Foreign Policy Council, Stephen Blank. Many thanks, Stephen, for speaking to us on TRT World. I believe as late as last week, Iranian analysts were saying that Tehran was 50-50 on whether to sign. Are you surprised that it's come together, this deal?
No, I'm not surprised that Iran has signed the agreement because Iran is under enormous international and economic pressure. And if they did not sign the agreement, they would encounter more pressure from states that could otherwise be their partners that would bring even more pressure to bear on them to sign this agreement. It's clear that Iran does not think the agreement is absolutely fair or in its interests. And I suspect that Iran is responsible for holding out against the idea of delimiting borders in the Caspian Sea because they want a greater share of the sea. But they had really no choice at the present moment but to sign the agreement.
Historically, the Caspian Sea was actually controlled by Iran at one point, then eventually lost it in various ways. Can you explain to us why the sea is so contentious and so attractive?
Well, as you said, there's an enormous amount of hydrocarbons in the sea itself. But even more importantly, if the sea becomes available to the construction of international pipelines, then the Central Asian littoral states, Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan, will be able to build a pipeline through Azerbaijan to Europe, which will compete with both Iran and Russia. And the Iranians will lose market share even more than they've already lost or are about to lose due to the various sanctions on them. And they were also worried that the United States was trying to build a naval force there to threaten Iran, which was absolute nonsense because it's a landlocked sea, so the U.S. Navy can't get there. But the economics of energy were predominant here.
Who do you think is most likely to benefit from this particular deal as it stands?
Well, from what I've heard, and that's not a conclusive statement, but it looks like Russia got most of what it wanted. The Russians, too, were obsessed with the idea that foreign militaries would somehow come into the Caspian Sea, and that's not going to happen now. Second, there are reports that this convention still says that anybody who wants to build a pipeline through the sea has to get the assent of all the other littoral states, which gives Moscow a veto on any future pipeline projects. If that is the case, then Moscow really has triumphed here. And even if it's not the case, they have not yet determined the borders, as President Rouhani said. And as a result, there's no conclusion as to whose waters belong to whom in the Caspian Sea. So, for example, let's say Kazakhstan wants to build a pipeline to Azerbaijan. The Iranians or the Russians can claim, well, that's really our territory, and you can't do it, and just stop the project dead.
Interesting to talk to you, Stephen Blank, Senior Fellow for Russia on the American Foreign Policy Council.